In today's segment, we're going to be looking at land supply across metropolitan Adelaide. Why land supply? Well, land supply is often a good indicator for determining where house prices are going to go, and it simply comes down to the law of supply and demand. If you have a given amount of land, given supply of land, and there's a ever-increasing demand for that land, the law of supply and demand would suggest that prices for that land will increase, and consequently prices of housing will eventually increase as well. Land supply isn't the only indicator. There are other indicators. There's zoning policies in certain areas and also population growth issues as well. And we'll be speaking a bit about all of these today. To help us with this, we're going to be speaking with Terry Walsh. Terry's the Executive Director at the Urban Development Institute of Australia, in the South Australian division of that. So, Terry, thanks for making the time to speak with us today. To get things started, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Angela, I'm the Executive Director of the Urban Development Institute of Australia, South Australian Division. Each of the states has their own division, and so we're a federation of UDIAs in a sense. And so we focus on our membership being all those people associated with developing land, creating communities. I guess we distinguish ourselves from HIA because they build houses. Some of their members are our members. Some of the members of the PCA, the Property Council, who focus very much on the buildings associated with the Central Business District. Some of those members are also our members because they're involved in developing land. So for us, the cornerstone of the industry is about developing land and creating communities. And as a consequence, we've got a whole lot of members, apart from the big developers themselves, who are engineers, surveyors, planners, marketers, bankers, lawyers, property analysts, anyone who makes a living out of support services or professional services to the actual developers who cut up the land. So the availability of land, the pricing of land, the access to zoning requirements is really a cornerstone of what our industry association represents. I've been here 18 months. I was formerly a management consultant for 17, 18 years. I did some work with the property industry, and so the UDIA invited me to take this role a year and a half ago.
So Terry, can you tell us a bit about the land availability issue that we currently have here in South Australia?
Sure. Adelaide's unique, well, I guess every city is unique in some respects, but Adelaide has the skinny topography, or has a skinny shape, and it also has a very flat topography as well. Extending from the south, where we have some difficulties of development down the south of Adelaide. So most of the development, in fact 70% of the development in the next few years is expected in the north of Adelaide. Land is very flat. Increasingly that's extending into what was formerly rural or pastoral areas. Relatively easy to develop. Doesn't have major river streams or bridge requirements or land areas which are natural parks or whatever. So there's a large area of land which is relatively continuous and makes it available for pretty large scale development. So our next era of development is certainly going to be in the north of Adelaide. Unlike Sydney though, Sydney in the last 5 to 10 years, certainly since the Bob Carr premiership era, when they said no more come to Sydney, Sydney has developed very few lots. In fact, Adelaide, well, let's go to Sydney. Sydney in the last year developed fewer lots than did Adelaide. So it highlights the difficulty that they have in housing their population. Adelaide's a difficult one at the moment because we have a pent-up demand. In the last few years we've actually had a population increase after a decade or more of pretty stagnant growth in South Australia. Gladly we would say the last couple of years we've actually had really good population growth. I think last year we had 1.2%, that is to the year ending December 2008. We had 1.2% growth. The national average was 1.9% growth. So we're really happy with that. And I think resulting from the financial crisis that we've all been meeting, the next era would suggest that we've actually got a population increase that's going to happen quite significantly, certainly in South Australia's history. And for that, of course, we need new dwellings. And so that's why the industry favours the notion of this 30-year plan, where we've got some certainty of some land, some capacity to grow our population and have them housed in reasonable housing. But we've got some challenges to do that because we've been very slow in bringing land to market. We've actually had this population growth the last few years. Not all our public sector people have been used to that, I think after a decade or more of stagnant growth, we've got a whole era of public sector people who may not necessarily be confident to plan for growth. Unlike Queensland, for example, which for the last 2 decades has had considerable growth. And so they've just had it as a matter of norm to plan for growth. So we've got a need now for about 10,100 or more dwellings a year. And to do that, we need about 5,000 hectares of land. That's just a rule of thumb. Now, to do that, we need both the land available and we need it supported with appropriate infrastructure. And of course, we need it rezoned appropriate for residential developments. And that's where we're having some difficulty in South Australia. Not unique, I suggest, but we've got some difficulty in actually getting that land rezoned and brought to market. And the last couple of years, we feel as if that's slowing down relative to the demand.
Terry, relative to our population growth, do we have the amount of land that we need to support that population growth?
The blunt answer to it is we've got lots of land. Australians got lots of land. What we don't have is the right amount of land that's appropriately supported with infrastructure and is rezoned ready for residential development. So we ask ourselves, why is that so? And the answer to that is traditionally over the last 5 to 10 years we've had a large amount of our fringe land which has been government owned, and the Land Management Corporation has been tendering that to or arranging joint ventures with other private developers. And we would like that to speed up and increase. Progressively, we see over the next decade, much of that land that will come on for new dwellings will be land that our developers will buy from privately owned farmers, for example. Now that's great. We now need the infrastructure to support that, and we need it rezoned. We think that in the currently planned scenario that is associated with the 30-year growth plan, or 30-year plan for Greater Adelaide, we still see that for the projected population, we see a lack of land to cope with all those people. In fact, we think there's about only half the amount of land that we think would be required.
And this really comes down to the zoning of the land and also the land being made available.
Exactly. There's those two factors. One is the land available, and is it being made available either out of government hands via the LMC tendering process, or are the farmers themselves able to sell the land? That's the first thing. And then the second one is, having identified that land, how quickly can councils or whatever the authority is that governs that land, how quickly can they rezone it? That last point, or that last point, is one which we as an industry are really concerned about. It takes too long for our process to enable land that's identified, ready for development, to be brought to market and to be sold to my son and daughters and everyone else's son and daughters. So that's a real issue for us. And of course, not only is it the time, but it's the cost associated with that delay to a developer, but also the cost in actually going through the process, which we think is still far too laborious in South Australia.
Now, do you see this as being, it's not just in South Australia, but this is a national thing, isn't it?
It is.
And would you say that this plays a very significant part or a very significant role in our house prices being as high as they are?
We think so. Generally across the industry, there would be general view that our affordability here is very much related to the price to get land to market. And indeed, we would argue that the price per square metre in Adelaide over the last 5 years has more than doubled. We've actually increased at a faster rate than is Victoria. And Victoria is one of our major competitors in the sense of retaining our people in South Australia or attracting people to come to South Australia. So the price per square metre is a key indicator to compare Victoria and South Australia.